What if a single, medium-sized bomber never built for fame, never meant to dominate headlines, ended up shaping the fate of an entire battle? In a war defined by titanic clashes of battleships, swarms of fighters, and cities consumed by firestorms, one aircraft seemed too ordinary to matter: the North American B-25 Mitchell. It wasn't the fastest, it wasn't the heaviest, and to many in the military establishment, it was simply another tool in an already crowded arsenal. Yet in one critical moment, this ordinary plane became extraordinary. Against the odds, it delivered a strike that shifted momentum, rattled an enemy's confidence, and inspired allies desperate for a sign of hope. How could something so unremarkable rise to such prominence? That's the mystery we'll unravel, starting with the world into which the B-25 first arrived. A world teetering on the edge of collapse and hungry for a miracle. The year was 1942, and the world's balance of power seemed dangerously tilted. In the Pacific, Japan's empire stretched across vast oceans, its forces emboldened by stunning victories at Pearl Harbor, Malaya, and the Philippines. American morale was battered, its fleet scattered, its allies growing fearful that the war might be lost before it had truly begun. Resources were scarce, reinforcements months away, and the traditional weapons of war, battleships, and heavy bombers were often out of reach or outmatched. Desperation bred innovation, and commanders searched for solutions in places others had overlooked. Among them was a medium-range bomber, the B-25 Mitchell, sitting quietly on American airfields. It wasn't glamorous, but it was available, adaptable, and perhaps just reckless enough to be tried in a daring gamble. Military leaders weighed their options: risk humiliation by deploying an untested weapon in an impossible mission, or watch momentum slip further into enemy hands. In this atmosphere of urgency, one decision would set the stage for an extraordinary test of both man and machine, the moment when flaws could no longer be ignored.
At first glance, the B-25 Mitchell didn't inspire awe. It lacked the sleek silhouette of a fighter like the P-51 Mustang, and it certainly couldn't match the thunderous presence of a heavy bomber like the B-17 Flying Fortress. Instead, it was a compromise, a medium bomber designed to do a little of everything, but master of nothing. Its range was limited, restricting deep operations. Its armor was modest, leaving crews exposed when flak and fighters closed in. Mechanical quirks plagued its engines, and landing on short or improvised runways was often a gamble. Even its bomb load was modest compared to the giants of the sky. To many, the B-25 was useful, but not decisive, a workhorse meant to support, not to lead. How could such a plane possibly turn the tide in a world war? The answer, however, would come not from perfection, but from adaptation tested under fire.
The first missions of the B-25 did little to silence its critics. In the early days, crews struggled with unreliable navigation equipment and bombing accuracy that often left targets untouched. Overloaded with fuel and bombs, the Mitchell could feel sluggish, especially in hostile skies where Japanese Zero fighters or German interceptors prowled with lethal precision. Reports filtered back of engines overheating, hydraulic failures mid-flight, and bombs falling wide of their marks. To the men flying them, every mission carried the sting of uncertainty. Would the plane hold together long enough to make it back? Ground commanders, too, voiced frustration, questioning whether resources should be poured into a bomber that seemed destined to remain second tier. The disappointment cut deep, especially for pilots who believed their machine deserved more than mediocrity. Each setback painted the Mitchell as an aircraft too flawed to be decisive. Yet in these early struggles lay the foundation for a transformation that few could have predicted. Behind every flight of the B-25 were men wrestling with doubt and determination. Young pilots, barely out of training, climbed into cockpits, knowing the odds were stacked against them. Crews sat shoulder to shoulder in cramped fuselages, sweating over gauges that too often betrayed bad news: rising temperatures, sputtering engines, failing hydraulics. On the ground, mechanics worked through the night under floodlights, stripping engines and patching bullet holes with whatever materials they could find. For commanders, the decision to send these men into combat weighed heavily, each order balancing between necessity and sacrifice. Yet, what kept them moving wasn't blind faith in the machine. It was trust in one another. A navigator's calm voice during turbulence, a gunner's steady aim when fighters appeared, a mechanic's confidence that his patchwork repairs would hold. The Mitchell was imperfect, but it was theirs. And through grit and resolve, crews began forging a bond with the aircraft. That bond would soon change the way the B-25 was used in battle. Necessity forced innovation, and the B-25's shortcomings soon sparked daring ideas. Pilots and tacticians realized that if the Mitchell couldn't dominate at altitude, it might thrive down low. Crews began experimenting with low-level flying, skimming the ocean's surface to evade radar and reduce exposure to flak. Bombing runs were adjusted to. Traditional drops gave way to skip bombing, where bombs were hurled at such low altitudes they bounced across the water like stones before slamming into enemy ships. Engineers modified the aircraft, stripping excess weight, reinforcing nose sections, and even adding forward-firing machine guns to turn the bomber into a hybrid gunship. Each adaptation came with risk. One mistake at treetop level meant disaster, and every new tactic was untested under real fire. Yet slowly, the Mitchell began to shed its reputation as mediocre. What was once a liability was now becoming a weapon of surprise. The stage was set for a mission that would prove whether this gamble could pay off in war. What emerged from these adaptations was a new face of the B-25, one that few had anticipated. At low altitude, the bomber proved astonishingly rugged, able to absorb punishment and still claw its way home. Its twin engines gave it a reliability that, despite quirks, often outlasted enemy fire. The modifications, extra guns bristling from its nose and sides, transformed it from a vulnerable target into a predator, capable of shredding ships and ground positions with blistering firepower. Crews discovered that the very traits once criticized its medium size, its balance between speed and payload, made it uniquely versatile. It could operate from rough airstrips where heavy bombers dared not land, strike targets too risky for larger formations, and return again and again with minimal support. To its pilots, the Mitchell was no longer an all-Saran. It was a dependable partner that gave them a fighting chance. With its new role forged in fire, the B-25 was ready to etch its place in history with a mission that would shock the world. The proving ground came with a mission so audacious it bordered on impossible. The Doolittle. Raid of April 1942. 16 B-25s. Stripped down and modified, were loaded onto the deck of the aircraft carrier USS Hornet, a feat no one had ever attempted. The plan was to launch them deep in the Pacific, strike the Japanese homeland, and land in China, all with aircraft never meant for carrier takeoffs. As dawn broke, crews braced themselves against roaring winds and heaving seas. One by one, the Mitchells lurched forward, engines straining, wheels barely clearing the deck, before leaping into open air.
Hours later,
the bombers thundered over Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya, dropping payloads that caused little physical damage, but delivered a psychological shockwave. Japan's sense of invulnerability cracked, and America's battered morale surged. A single squadron of ordinary planes had struck the heart of the enemy. The raid proved the B-25's adaptability and cemented its legend, but its impact would echo far beyond the flames of Tokyo. The Doolittle raid did not cripple Japan's war machine, but its legacy was far greater than the bombs it delivered. For the Allies, it proved that the enemy's homeland was not untouchable, and that boldness could pierce even the strongest defenses. Strategically, it forced Japan to divert resources to homeland protection, reshaping naval deployments and accelerating the clash at Midway just weeks later. For the men who flew the Mitchells, the mission became a badge of honor, proof that courage, not perfection, defined success in war. The B-25 itself gained a new reputation, no longer a middling medium bomber, but a symbol of resilience and ingenuity. Its versatility would carry it across every theater of the war, from the jungles of Burma to the deserts of North Africa. In hindsight, the raid showed that history sometimes pivots not on overwhelming power, but on daring, calculated risks. Yet the true question remained: what lasting lesson does this moment offer us today? In the vast chronicles of World War II, it is easy to focus on the giants, the mighty battleships. The sweeping tank offensives, the cities reduced to rubble under relentless bombing. Yet sometimes history shifts not with overwhelming force, but with a single bold stroke carried out by men who refused to accept the odds. The B-25 Mitchell was never meant to be legendary. It was designed as a compromiser workhorse destined for supporting roles. But in one daring mission, it broke free of that label and carved its place into history. The Doolittle raid became more than a tactical operation. It was a symbol of defiance, a reminder that ingenuity and courage could overcome despair. But from that moment forward, the Mitchell was no longer seen as ordinary. What other ordinary tools of history might still hold the power to change everything?